given the nature of the subject and the long and complicated history and all the different opinions surrounding race, and especially I was like the most gate-kept sense of identity, even with no biological backing anymore by the scientific community, we pretty much agree that it's a social concept. And everyone says it's like, oh, no one wants to be defined by their race. No one wants it to like have an effect on their life or any way. And yet still, it's still seen as like one of the most important and defining aspects of individuals. This may be controversial, but that's the thing. I'm a principled person. I believe in truth, in honesty. I believe in not saying what's popular or is going to, I guess get me praise, but I guess I believe going to be on the right side of history based on the future and based on trends that we have seen in the past through different movements based on identity. There's lots of reasons why people think that this is not consistent with those previous movements, but I'm going to explain why, in fact, is. I have a little bit of a script here because I have a whole lot of points I need to make. And so I guess I'm going to start with this, like the definition of race. What is race? Depending on who you ask or which definition you search for on the internet, it can be found like purely just from your phenotypes and genotypes. Others sources will say like your ancestry and your genetic markers. It depends on the history, where people migrated from. Some even say like, oh, your behavioral and cultural attributes, like down to the personality, are like a factor of race, which is, why people have been accused of like not acting white or acting black, in some contexts. So it's sort of like a pie, and there are pieces of the pie, and all the pieces together equal a race. Or sometimes just one of those pieces can be a race. And sometimes two or three of those pieces, but one of those pieces isn't necessarily contingent on the race. I mean, you get what I mean. So, but why is it sensitive? One, because it's basically used as a caste system throughout history, based on arbitrary factors which have formed people's features from the environment, the history of colonialism, and how native populations were treated by especially white Europeans, or by the Spanish, or by the Arab colonization of North Africa, or the Mongolians, or feudal Japan. There's endless examples, okay? There's the exploitation side, there's like, apartheid, and there's China and America are constantly accused of exploiting developing countries for resources. There's dehumanization. There's like how black people were portrayed in the minstrel shows during Jim Crow and such, like caricatures, and all of the racist Looney Tunes cartoons depicting Asians and stuff like that. There's a misrepresentation, and there's like how Hollywood has constantly used white actors when they could have just hired someone like from that country. And also how they're portraying history, like with Pocahontas and shit. Like Pocahontas in real life was a girl who was basically forcefully brought to England by this old man named John Rolfe. She was still just a kid, and they portrayed this relationship with him and with John Smith as like being romantic, and they also made her like 10 years older, and the guy's like a decade younger as well. The romanticization and falsification of history, also the fetishization. There's how natives of minority populations are actually, like when they are in movies and shows, like how they've been portrayed, like Fook Me and Fook You and Austin Powers and stuff like that. And we have tokenism, as in there's people within a racial group that are, I guess, not really in the best interests of promoting their rights and equality, like Uncle Ruckus or Uncle Tom, Sambo, stuff like that. And there's Uncle Toms of like all different groups as well. Like for the transgender people, it would be like someone who's considered a true scum, or like a conservative trans person who like gatekeeps being transgender from people who like only identify with the gender element, but don't necessarily have what they call dysphoria and want to go through the whole series of procedures. So yeah, tokenism. That's kind of a long, complicated one. And then, of course, you have genocide. That's very self-explanatory. Very bad. Don't do genocide. We know how that goes. Now, to get into what transracialism actually looks like, most of it's online, most of it's on TikTok, most of it is from what we see on social media, on Discord pages, on YouTube, and also individual influencers who either talk about it a lot or identify as transracial. So we have the people, we have the social trends. Anyway, let's start with Oli London. So he spent around $300,000 on 32 plastic surgeries to become the biggest Jimin wannabe in history. It's like literally like a form of stalking, not just wanting to become like another normal Korean, like a specific person's identity that was like, that's just creepy as hell. And he had a terrible music career. He's uploaded videos on YouTube before with like terribly pronounced Korean. There's other Koreans reacting to it, and they couldn't understand what he was singing. It was on Twitter claiming that he was adopting core/Ian pronouns, literally reflecting of a right-wing troll that's like caricaturing a group. You know, it's like he's literally caricaturing himself. So he has annoying videos. Later decided like, oh, I'm gonna be a trans woman now because his career as a transracial was like dying down. People were stopping to watch his videos, and it slowly became more and more obvious that he was probably just doing all of this for attention. So, and despite all that, people still look at him as like the old leader of the transracial movement, even though he was literally just fucking Jim Crow for transracial people. And yeah, he later became a Christian reactionary, which I'm sure, which is possible that he actually like always was and was just running the show the whole time, showing up on Tucker Carlson and Daily Wire and all that stuff, like talking about the dangers of puberty blockers for children and blah blah. But we all know he's full of shit and he just wants money. So he was on H3H3's podcast for selling dolls. At the time, he was like this fake, you know, reactionary Christian, but he was still selling dolls that looked like he did when he was identifying as a trans Korean woman. It's just the most fakest fucking person on the planet. So I want to start with the worst. I'm going to go down to the, like, I guess the less egregious. So the next one we have is Treasure. It's complicated because she's a black girl, and she was on Dr. Phil saying that she was white. She wanted to be a white, but the thing was, it wasn't just like, oh, she has had a fascination with white culture and rock music and golden retrievers and caramel pumpkin spice lattes, but she's like very presented as black for the most part. She didn't seem to portray it, but what she did do, just talk a lot of shit about other black people. Stereotypes out the ass, like calling them all kinds of slurs, and you can just watch it for yourself. So that there also seems to be like trend of like, oh, the people identifying as transracial, like, well, it's not just so much like they're really interested in becoming this race because they're just really interested in this race and group, but more so than the identity that they came from, you know? And that's honestly just kind of sad. And you kind of got to feel bad for people like her. At the same time, that kind of degrading other people because of your own beliefs, because of your own prejudices, there's no excuse for it. The Rachel Dolezal. So here's the difference between grifter influencer like Oli London and Rachel Dolezal. So she was part of the NAACP. She was like outed by her parents for being transracial. Like since she was a kid, it was apparent that she was like immersed in black culture, had black friends, and I guess most of her experiences growing up as childhood and through teenagers and stuff. And somehow that ended up with her adopting a black persona. She became this prominent person at the NAACP. But the funny thing was, she was always like, she was never super flamboyant and exaggerating of like stereotypes in the interviews. In fact, she kind of seemed nervous sometimes, like in interviews, and she was like, she always seems like respectful as she could be. At the same time, it's like, this is a radical, you know, concept to some people. So there's really nothing she could have done. And yeah, she lost almost everything. Well, first she lost her position at the NAACP. I mean, you talk about white privilege, losing your job. White privilege, you're always the first one to lose your job and get canceled. That's not privilege. Yeah, so, and then she was later fired from her teaching job because she was discovered to have an OnlyFans account, which of course is also a form of anti-sex work discrimination. And so that's how you know, at the least, she wasn't a grifting piece of shit like Oli London. And she did once lie about who her father was. Like she had an agreement with someone to lie that this other black guy was her dad. But I mean, what was going to happen if she was going to be honest about it, what her real parents were? The same shit was going to happen anyway. So it's like, you know, if people would have accepted her real parents or accepting of transracial like Denise, then she could have been honest with about who her real parents were. But you know, that's how that goes. And so the last one I'm talk about is this guy named, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but he changed his name to Xiahn Nishi. And so he's this Brazilian guy, and I'm not sure if he like identifies as Korean or Japanese or Chinese or whatever, but so yeah, the first name is apparently Chinese, the last name is definitely Japanese. And he at least only got like 1 to 3 surgeries or something, but he actually passed like as an Asian, like 10 times better than Oli London with a small fraction of the money. It actually didn't look too bad afterwards. But the funny thing is, no one was pissed at him because he didn't go around talking about his race a whole lot, making shitty music videos and talking on the Ellen show about his struggles as a trans Japanese Korean or whatever he's trying to be. And yeah, the funny thing was I believe I heard that he actually just got some injectables that like wear off after 3 years or something. There's some videos where he seems to look good, and then other instances it looks kind of elf-like, kind of alien. But it's a lot of it's just the lighting and the angle and stuff, and everyone can draw their own conclusions. But arguably the least like transracial person, despite like doing everything, because I mean, he was just living his life, you know? He was just adopting the phenotypes that he wanted to adopt, and no one really cared, so that's where I'm going to end that. Now, about the online trends. Subliminals are a pseudoscience. As we all know, subliminals don't work. But the subliminals in music, beats, like what they call binaural beats, you could have any topic made up for whatever music or beats you're playing. It could be like forced feminization, masculinization type, hypnosis kind of beats, you know, music. Another one is like growth hormone, I guess for the Chads. They want to grow an 8-inch cock and 6 foot and all that. And the subliminals, it's like, but all it really is they're just playing videos of K-pop, and they have a wall of text over it, but what it really comes down to is just to cope for the absence of technology. There's subliminals for all kinds of things, but we all know that it's not serious. Sometimes there's even subliminals for just relaxing yourself before an exam or getting better sleep. But at the least, there's music and whatever helps you relax to study for an exam. I mean, that is actually effective, but that's the most you're going to tangibly get out of subliminals. And so the face claiming, this is probably the creepiest aspect of what we see from the RCTA / transracial thing online. It's like, when you look at the absence of transracial role models, especially good ones, you really notice that no one really has before and after pictures the same way that trans men and women do, where it's like they start estrogen or testosterone, and then after like 6 months to 5 years, they have their sleigh pictures. The way Oli London spent over $300,000 to pass as a middle-aged white woman is actually pretty crazy. Like, the most those surgeries can do, they can give you facial features that are slightly more towards the direction of, like, a different ethnicity, but it's not going to make you pass as that. Like, your brow ridge, your cheeks, your chin, your nose, your eyes, to an extent, you can edit those just a little bit. But especially for someone like trying to appear Asian who's like white or black, it's like that brow ridge, you can only bring it back so far, but Asians, their eyes are like almost aligned with their forehead. It's like super close, and that's another good reason why monolids work for them. Trying to change your racial appearance just generally doesn't work, because the skull shapes, they're the most concrete like thing. We are so far from having the technology to change our skull shapes to make plastic surgery really that effective. That's what it comes down to. So yeah, there's a lack of role models. There's a lack of before and afters. That's one of the main reasons why we have face claiming. So why do people hate transracialism? One, it's obvious that they're out of touch with the culture They're out of touch with the norms in the everyday life, the lived experience. Most of the time, they're obsessed with unrealistic beauty standards, such as the 1% of K-pop idols and J-pop idols, and, Hollywood actors and actresses, Bollywood, or even just fictional characters like Tifa Aerith, Final Fantasy VII. Superficial understanding of the culture, and, of course, migration and assimilation can help with that, but you're still not going to have the same lived experience as someone of that native race, like in that native country. So yeah, number 2, they didn't grow up with the struggles and experiences of that race. But to that, I would want to ask you, would you want to go through the lived experiences and struggles of a trans person, or especially like a trans man or woman, or much less someone who is openly transracial and like losing their job and their reputation, everything to justify their existence? A completely different experience, having your entire identity questioned, as it is to sometimes being discriminated against for who you are. And of course, both cases are wrong. You should never be discriminated against for who you are, but you should also not be discriminated against for whatever caused you to want to change a fundamental aspect of your identity. And so yeah, the same argument has been used against trans people, like, oh, they won't understand pregnancy or having periods or growing up as that sex. They'll never understand what it's like to get rejected all the time as a man. But trans people, for one, transgender people at least, they spend tons and tons of money on hormones and affirmation surgeries and stuff. They deal with harassment, and actually trans women, there's a lot of studies that say that trans women face more assault on average than cis women in some cases, and they're especially assaulted in prison, where a lot of people advocate that trans women are forced to go if they should go to prison. Yeah, they're assaulted a lot, they're murdered disproportionately. And the same case would probably be like if there was a lot of openly transracial people, like they would most certainly be assaulted by people who absolutely hate them. So yeah, Rachel Dolezal, she was treated terribly after she was outed. So you can talk about experience. Well, you're giving someone a terrible experience. The point is this: past experiences don't define you, and you can't change the past, but you should at the least be able to assimilate into whatever identity you like in the present. And perhaps your future experiences will be different. And so, here's the third point. It exposes the fact that despite people are always saying race doesn't matter, and they only want to be judged by their merits, and that they do in fact believe their race defines them to an extent. Or why else would you all be gatekeeping it? So I'm white, right? I don't have a race, at least. So the same liberals who decry against transracialism because of cultural appropriation also tell white people that they don't have a race. So they don't have a race, they can't adopt a race. It's like, that's why the majority of people identify as transracial like are white. It's kind of like what are they going to do, But Caucasian race is even contested as being authentically like a race, such as Asian or African American, because of white supremacy. It's like, Now it's even being contested that there's a race at all. So now we just have ethnicities. Even white ethnicities, are challenged, because of anti-racism. Like, someone can come from North Africa or the Middle East into Germany and identify as in German just as much as the native cans, and because they're white, they can't be any more like German or English than a brown or black immigrant from a poor country could, because that would be racist. But that's good for me, in my opinion, because that just proves that me as a white person am actually not defined by race, because I don't want to be defined by race. And I think the concept should be abolished because it's full of pseudoscience, based on pseudoscience. So anyway, I'm going to get to the next point. So outsiders will misrepresent them and perpetuate stereotypes. And so, as we know, white people have a history of, as I said, poorly representing minorities in Hollywood, and blackface, yellowface, not hiring someone from the country, etc. Now, even today, we've sort of done a 180. We have Black Cleopatra, we have Black Little Mermaid, Black Snow White, and no, that's not an oxymoron. Yeah, so it's sort of like woke whitewashing. We're combating racism with more racism. I want to talk about actually the people who I see mainly responding to stuff regarding RCTA, Transracialism, ECTA. And that's, of course, the identity politics-obsessed liberals, IDPOL, and Black and Asian Americans. For one, Black people and Asians are the ones whose identities are most being, like, adopted/appropriated. And two, because their identities are a lot more gate-kept than white. So, generally speaking, identity politics obsessed liberals aren't just obsessed with race, but pretty much everything surrounding it. No one's allowed to leave their cultural bubbles. No Chinese prom dress, no Vietnamese sun hat, no sombrero. You know the shtick. Meanwhile, the ethnic communities and the countries that those cultures came from, they love for their culture to be exported to the world and shared. This cultural gatekeeping thing is already sort of uniquely American, but the idea of someone appropriating so much that they're willing to, like, completely change the race, it just takes it up to a whole nother level for those already obsessed, like, liberal IDPOL types. And so, Black Americans, I guess to start with, you do have a great reason to be serious about racial politics. You know, when you actually look into the history of America, its founding, how it was founded, even the founding fathers, who a lot of people worship, had slaves. We had Jim Crow, blackface, redlining, the generational wealth gap, which continues to this day, the ongoing issues of racism in the courts and the justice system, and so on. So this has pretty much given them every reason to be critical of people wanting to assimilate aspects of other cultures, you know, given the history of exploitation that they're familiar with. Even so much so that the Black Americans actually originally coined the term woke, in reference to them being, like, hyper aware to the double standards and discrimination that they face. And of course that goes back to Rachel Dolezal. You know, like, how could she, as a white woman, truly comprehend the weight that comes with being born in that skin in America? And my answer is this. Obviously, none of it should have ever happened. But if we're ever going to move past the idea there are fundamental differences in race, or that it defines us in any way, or makes us more or less valuable in any aspect, then we have to abolish the concept of fixed identities. You know, just as I don't believe that there are Christian or Muslim babies, you know, only babies which are brainwashed into religion, so were kids told, you know, what race and gender they are from a very young age. And I'm actually not against raising kids as their, you know, birth gender or race. As we become adults, we need to become more open-minded to the fact that people will be able to change things. So, Asian Americans, to no surprise, are largely invested in the RCTA/race change community, because that's who it's centered around for the most part. And RCTA is mostly, like, in the Western Hemisphere, and they're also Asian, and they speak perfect English. And they have the unique experience of being treated as American by Asians and Asian by white Americans. So a lot of them have also, I guess, struggled, like, connecting to their culture and their heritage and with their own sense of identity. So here they see these white TikTok kids coming along, you know, just claiming it, you know, with no history or ancestry whatsoever. So it's sort of like when you have someone who's insecure about their looks and they're actually really cute, and then you have the fattest bitch in the room who's like, I'm a 10, you know, and everyone hates her. That's the relationship that I would say Asian Americans have with RCTA and Transracials. But here's the thing. Your personal identity shouldn't be a competition. There's no fixed or finite number of people for any given race. And so there's no rules for joining a race in the first place. So there shouldn't be any rules for joining later on. And if you're an Asian American trying to reconnect or connect with your ancestry, the one thing that is 100% unchanging, you know, no matter how much development in technology, that's the one thing that will never change is your ancestry. It's like, that's great. You can connect with that. You can learn about your great grandparents. That'll be lots of fun. And you can move back to that country if you want. You could learn the language, and you'll feel more Asian than ever. Anyway, it was the sixth reason that people oppose transracialism. For one, there's a lack of people who identify as transracial. There is a lack of a broader academic, scientific understanding of it. It mainly just exists in online social bubbles, and individual influencers, some of which are apparently grifters, and others based on very rare, isolated circumstances where they're raised in an environment which makes them align more with a different race. Maybe it is like dysphoria, but it's not like someone's brain is structured like that of the opposite sex, and that helps to confirm like their gender identity. It's more like where someone's background and their upbringing and their extreme fascination and interest in a different culture and perhaps phenotypes leads them to identify more with that than their community that they were raised in. That's why I emphasize you need to watch over your kids closely. You need to instill values of pride in your kids. You need to make them proud of who they are and where they came from. So this kind of thing is less likely to happen. We're telling white kids that they're privileged and they don't have a race. So, of course, there's going to be more white kids who are going to go out and find a race. I'm going to get to this point later, okay? So, if there's not as much of a public support for transracialism, we're not going to have a bunch of academics and scientists scene about it unless there's need for papers, for studies, for a specific agenda, because it really, really, really takes off in the media. For whatever reason, rich people, the elites are invested in something, then we start seeing papers. It's like when COVID was a hot topic back in 2020, and it seemed like pretty much every expert and their brother had some study or fact check out that all came to the same conclusions that supported what the authoritarian elite liberals wanted, like lockdowns and distancing, and because they had an agenda to fill. And all of the dissidents that I guess became heard were fired from their positions, ousted from the intellectual community, and we saw them on Joe Rogan's podcast and Tucker Carlson, of course. And then if you weren't in a particularly notable position, you were, I guess, deplatformed or fact-checked on whatever platform you use. So here's the thing. So first thing comes first, then public opinion, and then people write papers if it's needed for an agenda. So it's not enough to say that not enough people identify as transracial, because inevitably this topic will continue coming up again in the future. And just because something exists as a social phenomenon and there isn't a lot of like professional research in it doesn't mean that it's not like a thing, you know, like shared social experiences and phenomenon. Everything starts as social phenomenon, and then we do the sciencing on it. So here's the seventh point about why people oppose it. It's new. It's radical. It's mostly talked about in a white Western context, and so it's just kind of viewed as a trend. And it goes against the natural order, God's will, and to add to that, there are reactionaries who make responses to this as well, but most of the time to be like, oh, you see, transracialism is bad because it's like transgenderism, and therefore they get to shit on two for the price of one. You know, so whereas the liberals are like, fucking, the transracials are making the transgenders look bad. But the reality is they're both valid. So yeah, there's not many real life examples of successful transitions, and we just don't have the technology yet that can like really alter people's genetics or skeleton that much, apart from surface level stuff like plastic surgery or skin lightening / darkening techniques, and also makeup. I get to the big question, all right? Why do I support transracialism and / RCTA? Well, it comes down to this. I'm not here to support what's popular or will bring me likes and praise. I'm a libertarian for one and a transhumanist. I stand by my principles, regardless of how unpopular they are, because I believe that the truth and freedom are the two most important values for society. And that truth is that freedom is superior to whichever discomfort someone feels with someone else's journey of self-discovery. To me, it's not the issues that get the most attention that always need it. It's those who have no voice or representation. You hear people talk about abortion and marijuana all day, supporting like the legalization of that, but as a transhumanist, my goal is to live by the values of the future and by values that are inherently correct. If you stick with the right principles, you're always ahead of the time, as long as you were not infringing on the rights of others, that you could do with whatever your life that you want. Now, principally speaking, the only way there could be a legitimate issue with someone changing their racial identity or identity in general in an extreme way would be like, one, it necessitates the violation of another's rights. I say we live we live years and years in the future, and people have total morphological freedom. So they want to become a mindless, flesh-eating zombie or something like that. And so they're going to be on the street, like, trying to eat people, you know? In that case, we would say, no, you should not become a mindless, flesh-eating zombie, because that inherently endangers the lives of others, whereas someone being white or black or Asian doesn't. The next one is, if it violates someone's privacy rights, such as identity theft, like DNA strand per DNA strand, copying someone's exact appearance in order to pose as them. Sort of like what Oli London wanted to do with Jimin. Or 3, it compromises their own autonomy, such as someone being like, I guess, force feminized. Let's say someone was held in a dystopian cyberpunk basement and forcibly turned into a sex slave or something. Or if someone was going to turn into something of which they no longer have the mental or physical capacity to, I guess, change back. And as a transhumanist, I don't believe in fixed or predetermined identities. I believe in the values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I understand that as we're all created equal, thus there's no reason to classify each other by things that we haven't decided for ourselves. Some people may take comfort in things like not everyone else can have or that is unchanging, and that's okay. That's called history. With all the future technology in the world we'll have to help people live their most authentic lives, we'll always be stuck with our history. We'll never be able to change who our great-great-great-great-great-great-father was. But that doesn't have to define who we are. And the second point that I want to make is, it's not just white people who want to be Asian. It's also white people who want to be black. Black people who want to be white. Asian people who want to be white. Asian people who want to be another Asian ethnicity. Or other who want to be other. Now, there are many reasons someone would want to change their racial classification. Many racial classifications are contested to begin with. So many Spanish people see themselves as white, while Americans see them as Hispanic. There used to be this theory called the one-drop rule, where someone with any amount of African heritage would be considered black, but of course that doesn't make sense because everyone migrated from Africa. People question if Indians are actually Asian, even though they literally came from the same continent, because the dominant culture in Asia is the Sinosphere, with Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. Now, parents who are smart teach their kids to be proud of their identity and heritage from a really young age, especially if there is a long history of discrimination. Why do you think the majority of RCTA are white kids? Like, we're telling them that white people are colonizers, privileged, everything but proud. Everything but proud Americans and proud of our heritage. Or proud English, or proud Germans, etc. And it comes down to this. A population with no pride will do one of two things, okay? It'll give up their identity to someone else, such as like Western Europe is doing with the Islamic populations. Or they'll discover a new one for themselves, like the RCTA are doing. Or the Passport Bros, or anyone else leaving the West for any number of reasons. And so, tell me why white Americans with like 80% English or German DNA can't identify as English or German American with no connection to English or German culture, but someone with the same amount of DNA, of Chinese DNA, could call themselves Chinese American under the same conditions. So what RCTA is essentially doing for a lot of white people is it's giving them a core identity to be proud in, that they couldn't get as a white person. So it seems to me that the main thing gripping other demographics for their identity issues is often a product of racism. It's a product of negative connotations with things like ghetto culture, poverty, crime, victim mentality, a lack of hardworking people with good values to support their family. And as we talked about, the girl on Dr. Phil, and for Chinese, it's often that their neighbors in Japan or Korea produce all kinds of awesome culture while their whole world is hidden behind a firewall and controlled by an autocratic, genocidal government. Even if you look up popular Chinese songs, movies, shows, most of them will be from Hong Kong or Taiwan, which of course China is also trying to forcefully take over and assimilate into their shithole. So, a lot of Chinese people, ironically now, want to become Korean or Japanese. And then some others, American because of Hollywood or something. So, I went into an RCTA server, and I ran a bunch of polls. The first one I asked was, what kind of RCTA are you? Subliminals / face claims / K-pop videos, or transracial / transhumanists. Of course, this separates people who are actually just in a trend versus the people who are serious. I got 6 to 12 votes in favor of the transracialism. So that confirms that the online trends such as subliminals and stuff are really just a coping mechanism for the lack of nanotechnology. Or either that, or they like the music. I don't know. The second question I asked is, would you rather have all the phenotypes associated with your preferred race, or be a native speaker in your desired language / culturally aligned, but stuck as your birth race? And actually got 3 to 4 votes in favor of the cultural elements, affirming that it is indeed a desire to connect with their favorite culture on a deeper level. Now, the third poll I ran was, what is your RCTA journey? And now for white to Asian, I got 8 votes, which of course is the majority. For Asian to white, I got 3. For Asian to black, I got 1. For white, black, Asian to other, I got 1. For other to white, black, Asian, I got 1. And for other to other, I got 5. So no black people voted in the poll. So therefore, without a doubt, black parents have done the best job at teaching their kids to be proud. And this is a reflection of that. Of course, we do have exceptions like the girl on Dr. Phil, but of course that can mostly be addressed by fixing the conditions that cause self-hatred. But in the end, if the underlying desire to change one's identity persists, then in the future we should learn to support that. So finally, the last question I asked was, and since a lot of people seem to think it's not serious, I asked, would you be willing to live with the struggles of and be treated as your preferred race to live as that race? Would you be willing to pay the price? I only got 5 responses, and so it's like, very obviously, if someone is very open about the fact that they want to live as another race, then they would sign the paperwork to go into the nanobot chamber to actually become that other race. Which brings me to my conclusion. Race is dumb. It's rooted in outdated science. The concept really just needs to be abolished. I don't know what else to say about it, because it's only ever used to categorize people arbitrarily, mostly based on phenotypes. But since we have at least mostly agreed, that race is a social construct, and that social constructs can mean what we want them to mean, then we may as well make it mean something that is not rooted in fixed identities. That it may as well not be contingent on unchanging things, such as our ancestry and heritage. In the end, there's only one race, the human race. It's not a monolith. People will continue to identify with whatever culture and aesthetics they want to as the world keeps progressing. As technology improves, we'll start having a broader and broader range of phenotypes which become interchangeable until we're basically shapeshifters. A society is going to have to learn to support them at some point, regardless of where they came from or what led them to those feelings.